Africa has just witnessed a moment carved in stone and water. Ethiopia has completed the Grand Renaissance Dam, the largest hydroelectric project in the continent's history. 14 years of toil, sacrifice, and unyielding belief have turned a dream into a monument of steel and concrete. For Egypt and Sudan, this dam is a threat to survival. For Ethiopia, it is nothing less than sovereignty made visible. A $4 billion colossus now rises over the Blue Nile, promising to more than double Ethiopia's electricity supply, lifting millions out of darkness. Yet this is not simply about turbines and megawatts. This is about dignity, about who controls Africa's rivers, about whether a nation long dismissed as too poor can stand tall on its own resources. Stay with us. This is not only an engineering feat, it is a turning point that could redraw Africa's future. Subscribe and walk with us through this journey of struggle, defiance, and hope. The question is not just how Ethiopia built a dam. The question is whether one project can tilt the balance of power in an entire region and inspire a continent to claim its destiny. In 2011, on a remote stretch of the Blue Nile in Benishangul Gumuz, Ethiopia laid the foundation stone for what many believed was an impossible dream. A dam taller than a 40-story building and stretching nearly 2 kilometers across the river was announced, carrying a price tag of $4 billion. International experts doubted the country's capacity. Critics called it reckless. Supporters called it revolutionary. 14 years later, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam stands complete, the largest hydroelectric project Africa has ever seen. The scale is staggering. The wall of concrete rises 145 meters high, holding back a reservoir capable of storing 74 billion cubic meters of water. Inside, 11 massive turbines now hum with life, 6 already linked to the national grid and bringing light where darkness had been the norm. At full capacity, the dam will generate 6,450 megawatts, more than doubling Ethiopia's entire energy supply. It is a scale of transformation that cannot be captured only in numbers. For decades, Ethiopia's industries limped along under the weight of blackouts. Factories stood silent, hospitals faltered, students studied by candlelight. Entire communities were trapped in cycles of energy poverty. The Grand Renaissance Dam promises to end that. Power will flow not only to cities but also to rural villages where electricity has always been a distant dream. It is more than a dam, it is a bridge to modernity. But what makes this story extraordinary is not the engineering alone. It is the way Ethiopia chose to build it. Unlike so many other African mega projects financed by foreign loans and dictated by external interests, this dam was funded largely by Ethiopians themselves. Teachers gave up slices of their salaries. Farmers donated from harvests barely sufficient for their families. Business owners poured profits into government bonds that were purchased not for return, but for duty. Diaspora communities around the world sent their savings back home. In a continent often told it must rely on others, Ethiopia turned inward and found its own strength. This collective effort turned the dam into a national movement. It was no longer just a line of concrete across a river. It was a symbol of unity, of sacrifice, of the belief that sovereignty is not given, but built. Every brick, every turbine, every dollar represented the will of a people to claim their future. Of course, the road was not smooth. From the very beginning, the dam became a lightning rod for controversy. Egypt, whose very lifeline flows through the Nile, accused Ethiopia of endangering its survival. Sudan expressed fears of disrupted water flows even as it hoped for cheaper electricity. International institutions hesitated, wary of funding a project that might inflame tensions. Ethiopia stood alone, choosing sovereignty over dependency, dignity over permission. Yet year after year, despite financial hurdles, technical challenges, and political pressure, the structure grew. International contractors worked alongside newly trained Ethiopian engineers, forging a generation of local experts who cut their teeth on one of the world's most ambitious projects. Workers endured extreme heat, isolation from families, and the risks of a massive construction site. Some communities were uprooted, resettled to make way for the rising reservoir. Each sacrifice added another layer of meaning to the dam. Now, as the turbines spin and electricity pulses through the nation, Ethiopia celebrates not only the end of blackouts, but the birth of self-reliance. The Grand Renaissance Dam is no longer a dream. It is a reality towering over the Nile, a monument to persistence. But numbers and pride are only the beginning. Because beyond the concrete and steel lies a deeper truth. This dam is not only about Ethiopia. It is about power in every sense of the word, electrical, political, and symbolic. If the Grand Renaissance Dam can electrify Ethiopia, what else might it ignite across Africa? The Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam did not rise quietly. From the moment the first stones were laid, the project carried not only the weight of concrete, but also the weight of geopolitics. What Ethiopia celebrated as a beacon of independence, Egypt denounced as an existential threat. For Cairo, a nation where more than 90% of fresh water comes from the Nile, any upstream project was seen as tampering with its very lifeline. Statements from Egyptian officials painted the dam as a dagger pointed at the heart of their nation. At times, rhetoric soared to dangerous heights. Warnings that all options, even military ones, were on the table. Media outlets in Egypt echoed the fear that a single dam in Ethiopia could dry the fields of the Nile Delta, withering crops and endangering millions. In Sudan, too, concerns were raised. Though the promise of cheap electricity tempted Khartoum, there was unease about how Ethiopia would manage the vast reservoir and the effect on Sudanese dams and irrigation. The tension spilled beyond words. Years of negotiations dragged on through African Union summits and high-level meetings, yet agreements remained elusive. Egypt demanded legally binding guarantees about water release schedules. Ethiopia insisted it had the right to develop, promising the dam would not consume water but regulate it, preventing both floods and droughts. The positions clashed again and again, each round ending in stalemate. And yet, inside Ethiopia, the mood was very different. Every challenge, every threat, every doubt only fueled determination. In Addis Ababa, the completion of each turbine was celebrated like a national holiday. Across the countryside, families who had given their meager earnings for bonds watched the news with pride, seeing their sacrifices transformed into steel giants humming with power. For them, this was not just about energy. It was about dignity restored. The drama unfolded not only in conference halls but also on the ground. Thousands of workers lived for years in remote camps, enduring blistering heat by day and bitter cold by night. Families were separated for long stretches. Entire communities were uprooted to make way for the reservoir, sparking debates about fairness and compensation. Yet despite these hardships, morale was often carried by a sense of higher purpose, the conviction that their sweat was writing a new chapter for Ethiopia. As the structure grew, so too did Ethiopia's defiance. Officials repeated the same message to the world. The dam was not a weapon, but a promise of electricity, of growth, of a future where Ethiopia would no longer bow to dependency. The symbolism was impossible to ignore. In a continent where mega-projects often arrive packaged with foreign debt and influence, the Renaissance Dam stood as a rare example of homegrown ambition. The international community looked on with divided eyes. Some hailed it as proof of what African nations could achieve when relying on their own citizens rather than foreign lenders. Others warned that water disputes, if left unresolved, could spiral into open conflict. Global powers, including the United States, issued calls for restraint, recognizing that a misstep in Nile diplomacy could destabilize not only the Horn of Africa, but the wider region. Through it all, Ethiopia pressed forward. Each stage of construction became a declaration of sovereignty. Each turbine installed was not only an engineering milestone, but also a political one. For Ethiopians, the dam was no longer about whether the lights would stay on. It was about proving to themselves and the world that they could carry a vision from blueprint to reality against the odds. The completion of the Grand Renaissance Dam was thus both a triumph and a challenge, both celebration and confrontation. It marked the culmination of a national struggle, but also the beginning of a new phase of regional uncertainty. If Ethiopia can withstand the storms of diplomacy and the threats of its neighbors, what storms still lie ahead inside its own borders? The hum of the Grand Renaissance Dam's turbines is more than a sound of electricity. It is the sound of transformation echoing through Ethiopia's towns and villages. For decades, millions of Ethiopians lived in darkness. Factories halted during blackouts, and hospitals struggled to operate vital equipment. Now the switch has been flipped. Lights glow in homes that once relied on candles. Students study into the night without fear of power cuts, and industries begin to roar back to life. The economic implications are profound. By generating over 6,000 megawatts, Ethiopia is not only ending its chronic electricity shortages, but also producing a surplus. This surplus can be exported to neighboring countries such as Sudan, Kenya, and Djibouti. Already agreements are being discussed through the Eastern Africa Power Pool turning Ethiopia from an energy-dependent nation into an energy hub. Revenue from electricity exports promises to fuel development projects, build infrastructure, and reduce reliance on costly imported fuels. For ordinary Ethiopians, the dam offers more than light and jobs. It offers dignity. Power no longer comes as a privilege, rationed and unreliable. Instead, it flows as a right, enabling small businesses, modern farming, and even digital connectivity. The benefits are tangible, but they come at a cost. Thousands of families were displaced when the massive reservoir filled. Villages disappeared underwater, replaced with promises of new homes and compensation. Yet not all resettled communities felt adequately supported. Some argue that while the nation gained, their traditions and livelihoods were washed away. This duality, progress for many, sacrifice for some, defines the civil impact of the dam. It is a story of upliftment, but also of loss. Farmers downstream worry about changes to the river's seasonal rhythm. Fishermen wonder if the ecology will adapt. Citizens ask whether the government will ensure transparency in managing the billions of dollars the dam will generate. Politically, the dam has redrawn Ethiopia's internal landscape. Successive administrations, despite their differences, were forced to embrace the dam as a national project, binding the state together around a single vision. In times of internal unrest, it served as a rallying cry, proof that the nation could achieve greatness when united. Yet it also became a pressure point. Opposition leaders accused the government of exploiting patriotic sentiment while neglecting those displaced. Civil society groups pressed for more accountability in how funds were raised and spent. Still, for the majority, the sense of pride overshadows the grievances. The Grand Renaissance Dam has become a living symbol of sovereignty. Its image adorns posters, its story taught in schools, its progress broadcast on national television. To Ethiopians, it represents a turning of the tide, a move from dependency to self-determination. This symbolism resonates far beyond Ethiopia's borders. Across Africa, leaders and citizens watch with keen eyes. If Ethiopia can marshal its people to finance and complete a mega project against international skepticism, what does that say about Africa's capacity for self-reliance? In Burkina Faso, for example, President Ibrahim Traoré has channeled similar energy into policies of agricultural and industrial independence. His rise to power, often framed in the context of the Ibrahim Traoré coup, is presented as a rejection of external control and a call for African nations to harness their own resources. The link is clear. Whether in Addis Ababa or Ouagadougou, the message is sovereignty over dependency. The dam is not just concrete and water, it is a declaration that Africa need not wait for aid, nor bend to outside powers to achieve monumental change. Yet the future is not without risks. Internal expectations are high. If the benefits of the dam are not equitably shared, resentment may grow. If environmental issues worsen, public confidence could erode. And if political leaders exploit the symbolism of the dam without addressing underlying social needs, unity may fracture. For now, however, Ethiopia stands proud. The dam lights up more than homes. It lights up the possibility of a nation charting its own course. But if the dam has redefined Ethiopia's domestic story, how is the rest of the world rewriting its narrative around this new African powerhouse? When Ethiopia declared the Grand Renaissance Dam complete, the ripples traveled far beyond the Nile Basin. This was not merely a domestic victory. It was a regional shift that forced governments, institutions, and global powers to reassess their positions. The African Union (AU) stepped in repeatedly as mediator, urging dialogue between Addis Ababa, Cairo, and Khartoum. Each round of talks highlighted the stakes: water for Egypt's survival, electricity for Ethiopia's future, and stability for Sudan's fragile political order. The AU framed the dam as both a challenge and an opportunity, a chance for Africa to solve an African dispute without foreign intervention. ECOWAS and regional blocs echoed that sentiment, recognizing the symbolism of African self-reliance. Yet in Europe and the United States, commentary was more cautious. Washington warned that unresolved tensions over the Nile could destabilize an already volatile Horn of Africa. European diplomats pressed for binding legal agreements to govern water releases, emphasizing international law. Meanwhile, China, though not the main financier, quietly noted the implications for infrastructure diplomacy across the continent. Reactions revealed a deeper divide. Supporters praised Ethiopia for proving that a nation can finance and complete a mega project from within, defying the narrative of dependency. Critics, however, warn that without trust building, the dam could ignite resource conflicts that transcend borders. Egypt's appeals to the United Nations underscored the possibility that the issue could become globalized, drawing in great power competition. But beyond the diplomacy and rhetoric lies a symbolic truth. Ethiopia has shifted the center of gravity. The Nile, long seen as Egypt's tool of influence, is now balanced by Ethiopian leverage. Power lines stretching to Kenya and Djibouti do more than transmit electricity. They transmit political weight. Energy is becoming a form of currency, and Ethiopia holds the switch. This continental rebalancing resonates with another story unfolding in West Africa. In Burkina Faso, the Burkina Faso revolution, led by Ibrahim Traoré, mirrors the same determination to reject dependency and reclaim sovereignty. Though their contexts differ, one a dam, the other political reform, both signal a broader awakening. African nations are seeking to redraw the terms of engagement, with their own people at the center. The dam is therefore more than an engineering feat, it is a diplomatic earthquake. And like all earthquakes, it leaves the world asking, will this new balance of power hold steady, or will it crack under pressure? If the world is unsettled by Ethiopia's new leverage, what path lies ahead for the nation itself? Opportunity or peril? The Grand Renaissance Dam is no longer a dream on paper. It is a living structure, turning water into light, ambition into reality. But completion is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of a new journey, one that carries both risks and promises for Ethiopia and Africa at large. The opportunities are clear. With its turbines at full strength, Ethiopia will not only power its own homes and industries, but also become the energy hub of East Africa. Cheaper, renewable electricity could fuel manufacturing, boost exports, and attract investment. Power exports to neighbors such as Kenya and Djibouti promise revenue streams that can fund roads, schools, and hospitals. The dam is not just a source of electricity, it is a foundation for a new economic model rooted in self-reliance. Yet alongside opportunity lies responsibility. Managing the 74 billion cubic meter reservoir requires delicate diplomacy. Egypt and Sudan remain wary, and unless agreements are reached, mistrust could overshadow the benefits. Ethiopia will need to balance its sovereign right to develop with its responsibility to share the river's lifeblood fairly. Missteps could reignite tensions, while careful stewardship could transform the Nile into a bridge of cooperation rather than a boundary of conflict. Environmental vigilance is also vital. Altering the flow of the Nile has consequences for agriculture, fisheries, and soil fertility downstream. Ethiopia must prove that renewable energy does not come at the cost of ecological damage. Transparent monitoring, data sharing, and collaboration with international experts will be necessary to silence critics and protect fragile ecosystems. Domestically, the government faces the challenge of ensuring the dam's benefits are equitably distributed. If electricity lights up cities while rural villages remain behind, the very symbol of unity could become a fault line. The displaced communities who sacrifice homes and land must not be forgotten. If dignity was the banner under which the dam was built, then dignity must also guide how its rewards are shared. Beyond Ethiopia, the dam has become a metaphor for Africa's crossroads. It proves that nations can finance and execute transformative projects without external dictates. But it also warns that ambition must be matched by responsibility. Across the continent, from infrastructure in the east to agricultural independence in the west, leaders and citizens are watching closely. The Grand Renaissance Dam is therefore not only Ethiopia's story, it is Africa's experiment with self-determination on a colossal scale. Whether it becomes a beacon of cooperation or a source of division depends on the choices ahead. And so the question remains, will this dam stand as a monument to harmony and sovereignty, or as a reminder of ambition's price? The story of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam is not only about engineering or electricity, it is about a people who chose dignity over dependency, sovereignty over silence. For 14 years, Ethiopians endured sacrifice, pressure, and doubt. Yet they delivered one of the most significant projects in Africa's history. Today, the turbines of the dam hum with more than power. They hum with pride, with the conviction that Africa can chart its own path. Ethiopia has proven that when a nation trusts its citizens and mobilizes its will, even the mightiest obstacles can be overcome. This achievement is not isolated. It resonates with a broader continental awakening, from the banks of the Nile to the streets of Ouagadougou, where leaders like Ibrahim Traoré echo the call for African self-reliance. His rise, often framed through the Ibrahim Traoré coup, symbolizes the same spirit, that sovereignty is not granted, it is seized and nurtured. Together, Ethiopia's dam and Burkina Faso's reforms form chapters of a single narrative, the Burkina Faso revolution of thought, where nations refuse to remain bound by dependency. One carves electricity out of water. The other seeks to transform agriculture and industry. Both declare that Africa will not wait for aid to dictate its destiny. Yet the dam raises questions that remain unanswered. Will the benefits be shared fairly among Ethiopia's people? Will the river become a bridge of cooperation or a trigger of rivalry? Will Africa's bold experiments in sovereignty inspire stability or provoke resistance from old powers reluctant to lose influence? The answers lie not in the turbines or the concrete, but in the choices that follow. Ethiopia has opened a door. Whether the continent walks through it depends on the courage of its leaders and the unity of its people. If one landlocked nation can rise from blackouts to become an energy hub, what stops the rest of Africa from seizing its own destiny? Stay with us. This is not the end of the story, but the dawn of a new chapter. Subscribe, share, and add your voice to this conversation about Africa's future.